Hello and welcome to Zero Trust World 2025 with Threatlocker and the Cyber Show.
Hi and welcome to this Zero Trust World 2025 episode, part 1. So we're going to be following Helen and Ed and camerawoman Alicia around Florida for the Zero Trust World conference.
So this episode on Zero Trust is available in both audio and video formats. We do suggest heading over to our YouTube channel and have a look at the event because it was a lot of fun. You get thousands of cybersecurity professionals and students from around the globe together in an absolutely stunning environment. We learned a lot and made lifelong connections. So let's start by looking at our hosts, Threatlocker, and what they have to offer, which differs a lot from the rest because their core architecture is all based on Zero Trust.
So, Helen and Ed, you're back from the Zero Trust World conference in Florida. With Threatlocker, what was that all about?
Oh, wow. So it was a huge festival of education and learning and understanding really what Zero Trust is. But there was all sorts going on at the event. We had a magician on stage, right? He was doing all sorts of amazing things with robotics and with digital technology, which actually really sums up Zero Trust quite well, actually, in a really entertaining way, because everyone's a little bit tricky online. So that was really interesting. There were loads of information such as visits to the dark web. So if you were a student and you've never seen it before, it's a really good and safe environment to go and do that. There were rooms with thousands of laptops set up with people coming in and out doing their cyber hero examination as well. So really, really interesting event. The main stage was absolutely packed. It was really exciting. Kind of puts our conferences to shame actually a little bit over here. So many lasers, so much sound. It was just absolutely phenomenal.
And I really enjoyed speaking to all those tech vendors as well and just asking them what Zero Trust means to them. Obviously, we're going to insert all that stuff as well for people to watch. But yeah, so many great people, so many great vendors. It's really interesting to figure out sort of where everyone's head is and find out what Zero Trust means. It actually differs between people and organizations. But I think everyone made the general consensus by the end of the event, which was really cool to see.
Absolutely. And at the very end of the event, and you've probably seen a couple of photos from there already as we talk to you, there was a huge Comic-Con party, which was just absolutely out of this world. If you do really get those techies together and we do nerdy things, the conversation starts flowing and we will share some of that as we go because it was really, really nice. And I guess that's something that we picked up as well, which we'll discuss as we go through this episode. But there's a real sense that when you employ Zero Trust in a digital environment, you actually need to employ trust in a personal environment, and that was really fostered actually at this festival. Where else are you going to sit on a table with a CEO, students and new beginners in their careers alongside engineers who've been in the basement all their lives? It was really, really interesting to have those conversations.
Yeah, I think it was really interesting to speak to people about the human side of cybersecurity, and it's always the really critical part of any Zero Trust architecture when we're thinking about, you know, there was like Mail Protector who were there, who were talking about, you know, phishing and a lot of the human side of security. But yeah, there was definitely a very strong human sort of layer 8 situation going on at this conference, and stopping the threats before they even become threats, which I guess is kind of hence the Threatlocker. But yeah, it was a great time, and it was really interesting to see what people's security practices were, and hopefully a lot more enhanced since the conference.
I hope so.
Okay, so the conference was all about Zero Trust and cybersecurity education, am I right?
Right, yeah. We're going to get further into that education later on as we talk to the giant of KnowBe4 and a bit of our favourite hacking labs here, which is Try Hack Me. But we also get the lowdown direct from students at the event. Now, I know you're practically written an academic book, Andy, on Zero Trust, and we know you're an absolute expert on the subject. So can you explain the core concepts for our listeners who may be unaware of what that term means? Do we not trust anyone? No server, no data center? Do we need to encrypt and check everything? everything. Are my apps the same 3 years after they've released?
Yeah, okay. Well, I can do my best. Let's just start off by saying that zero trust is not zero trust. It's being mindful about trust. It's thinking about trust, and making that an ongoing negotiation.
And I guess it's something that we're going to come back to as we talk to all the different people when we explore the event, because it really was focused on zero trust.
Why zero trust? Well, that's because what Threatlocker do commercially. And Threatlocker provide a security protection software and platform for zero trust security over a rapidly growing global network. And zero trust has been highlighted as necessary by engineers for decades. But so far, companies have struggled to incorporate the concept into their security products and their controls. So we spoke to Seamus, who is the head of EMEA operations at Threatlocker in season 4. Where Helen really put some pressure on to determine if zero trust concepts were at the head of Threatlocker's security platform.
And yeah, we were impressed by Threatlocker's zero trust competency, and we wanted to delve a little bit deeper. When we were invited over to Florida to Zero Trust World 2025 for an educational conference on zero trust, we just could not resist. Not only did we get to understand more about Threatlocker, we spoke to many different companies who are also incorporating zero trust into their security offerings, all the way from emails right up to new technology such as AI. We spoke about the flaws of perimeter security and how to educate people faster and more efficiently, as well as what zero trust means. Is there a corporate consensus in the cybersecurity landscape when it comes to zero trust? Will AI change how we do security over the next decade? And how does community and human contact and even conversation play a role? And why was the event an absolute nerd heaven? Threatlocker allow listing is something that they're really, really keen on in their products. And it's not your typical sort of OS-based allow listing that we usually have. It actually asks the app the zero trust questions, those correct questions, such as like, what is it doing? What does it actually have access to? Does it actually need the internet to function? Is it running en route? Did it just write 300 files or make an unnecessary registry change? As an engineer, this was just needed quite badly to save time. And there is so much time that you end up spending manually going through, particularly in a Windows environment in an office. You're going to be going through manual file locations, registry edits, using things like Process Monitor, which is, if you've ever used it, it's insane. It's like 3 million, events happening on your computer at once, even at rest. So it's quite difficult to start learning all those filters. You're going to have to be looking at package changes and software update changes, and actually sometimes looking into that code. Well, actually, if you can have a software that can do that for you and to start asking those questions and print you out a report, it's actually going to save you a lot of time that you would be investing doing that manual threat list, threat hunting, going through things. Yeah, is it going to cut down jobs? Absolutely not. We're in a skills crisis, so we do need a way of streamlining what we've been doing for the past 30 years, and it's really good to see that we can start putting controls on those rather naughty and insecure apps. They do come at a cost though, right? So I had some issues, I've mentioned it before. So when you have these really strong security programs, pen testing does become difficult, and that's probably a good thing, right? Because it's working. But one of the things that they block is curl, and I remember spending at least a day wasted trying to install a load of Linux packages in my test environment just to find out that Sophos generally was blocking it and the firewall was blocking it, and nobody thought to put the IT pen tester doing that through the firewall. So, you can get these issues with this high level security technology, and I think people are a little bit sometimes put off by that, but realistically, and this is what zero trust was sort of giving us, is that if you learn how to use that software correctly, if you know what you're doing and you know what those reports are reading, and you've got that skilled employee there who understands the full scope, it's only going to be a benefit and not a problem.
Yeah, I guess this is what we were talking about. In fact, Andy's blog article about eating your own dog food is really important in security, where even the high-level user stuff, from an entire organizational point of view, is covered. Everyone can be a bit lackluster sometimes when it comes to the policy, and they kind of, oh, well, I'm the security guy, so it doesn't matter if I click this maybe dodgy link. So it's always good that you've got those protocols in place and you're keeping the entire organization protected, even if sometimes it's going to piss you off and you're going to get a bit wound up with certain restrictions in place.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
And we're way too trusting of apps, and there's that issue with implicit trust as well, where we put an app on our phone and you'll think that's going to be fine forever, and people don't often think, well, actually, is M365 when I got it 30 years ago from my organization the same as it is today? Absolutely not in any way. No, it's completely moved. It used to be in your cupboard in your building. It's now completely entirely in the cloud. There have been huge changes, and although the software might not have changed visibly in that time, or maybe the functions are still there, or some of the UI's just slowly been updated, it doesn't mean it's the same on the back end.
Yeah.
So I guess a good way to approach this as well is to look at how the different operating systems that we predominantly use, the two main ones, which is Linux and Windows, which is something that Threatlocker both work with, how do those take a different approach to zero trust? And does it mean that Threatlocker and other companies have got to approach that in an entirely different way?
Kind of does. It's really interesting that Threatlocker has grown up in the Windows environment, and as you were just saying about how 365 has completely metamorphized into something that's unrecognizable from what it used to be, is that Windows is an operating system that doesn't trust its user. Windows is essentially an adversarial operating system where the operating system makes it very, very difficult for the user to know what important trust relationships exist and where they're located. Whereas Linux is an operating system that's designed to be curated and changed, and you have infinitely more control over, but that becomes very, very complex, and so the average user is not able to do it. And what we're hoping in the future is that Threatlocker will become more and more of a more important figure in guiding and making easier the user land space for Unix type operating systems to actually amplify those kind of policy choices for the maybe less technically able users. That's what I'd hope to see. Yeah.
Absolutely. And they do something that's quite to my heart. It's quite close to my heart, I would say. And they do block storage devices, which, as Danny, the CEO, said, find me an app that doesn't do that. But again, this is where we go back into that zero trust. What they do is slightly different from others. They're not just working out and saying, no, you can't have it. You can't use that. Because when you do that, people do break the rules. And we all know that. We've all spoken about it. They'll break the rules. They'll sneak things in. They'll do things another way. Or they'll exfiltrate their entire data to their personal email. Because, that happens a lot. So they can work on it at home. So just blanketing saying, no, you have to use just the clouds or the internal storage doesn't really work in remote working or home working that we have today. So how do we do that safely? Well, you need to know what's going on, who's accessing data and when. Why are they accessing the data, and get alerts when someone's accessing data that they shouldn't be, so that you allow it for some people, but maybe not for your marketing teams, because we all know that they can be a little strange with some of the things that they like to put on. And just, again, just making sure that you know exactly what your storage devices are doing, and if anything's being run on them they shouldn't be. Again, that's zero trust. Use it, but let's check it. And if you've got backups, what's accessing the backup? Because it shouldn't be a lot, right? And we need to know who is on that all of the time.
So network control has been really instrumental in mitigating the rise of remote encryption, attacks, prevalence technique in ransomware campaigns. In these attacks, threat actors usually leverage a compromised endpoint or propagate encryption across the network, targeting devices that may otherwise be protected by usually endpoint security measures. So once inside the network, attackers can execute a wider range of malicious activities, could literally be anything, and exploit lateral movement to escalate those privileges and deploy those additional payloads. So to defend against this, organizations can usually implement dynamic port access controls, which allow ports to open and close dynamically based on the real-time IP address of maybe the authenticated user, even in environments that might be using DHCP. So this approach significantly enhances security by reducing that attack surface, whilst also preventing those unauthorized network attacks and access. And also, it's really important to maintain that operational flexibility, which is what keeps the business running. So while the fine-tuning is required, that kind of methodology aligns closely with the zero trust principles that we're talking about, rather than like traditional static firewall rules, which often rely on predefined access policies rather than like a real-time enforcement.
I guess it's really handy actually to be able to control certain aspects of your business or environment, especially when you're going up into those bigger companies. You may have your entire sales team that are going out on a trip somewhere, and it used to be that the IT guy would have to sit there and go through it all one by one by one. And I do a lot of remote work. I know we all do, and it's a case of when you're doing those contracts, I have to keep telling people where I am. I'm here. I'm there. You know, where am I in the world today? And I have to wait, you know, a good 3 hours sometimes for this to go through the typical security rules. It would be really, really handy to almost plug your calendar in, especially when you are running a company, and for it just to be done dramatically beforehand. So that's something that I know that they offer. And this is very similar to that. You know, you can add and change those ports as and when you need to on your network, open up what you need to open up when you need to open it. If you need to close your web port because, you know, you're getting attacked, it doesn't mean that you can shut down all of your access to your apps. You have that option. If you spread your clients out enough, you do have the option to basically have a hack or have an incident, and you might not be able to have to shut down everything. You can segregate what you're having to shut down because you can just shut down the ports to whatever's being hacked at the time. It's going to stop a lot of that lateral movement as well.
So the zero trust model for Threatlocker, what really sets it apart from maybe other software or protocols? Well, unlike traditional security solutions that generally focus on detection and alerting, Threatlocker's zero trust model actively enforces those security policies by blocking unauthorized activities in real time. It goes beyond the simple monitoring, and by integrating with existing policies, actually allowing more granular control over a bespoke network configuration, maybe even a complex system architecture. So Threatlocker provides those capabilities, such as we were talking about, the port blocking dynamically and write access restrictions, delivering both detection and prevention within one single solution. So let's have a little chat about Zero Trust and the core of its architecture, especially surrounding Threatlocker. From its foundation, Threatlocker has been built around a Zero Trust security framework, which is really diverging from those conventional perimeter-based defenses that rely on reactive detection mechanisms. This security-first approach has actually fueled the company's rapid expansion. And just this week, Threatlocker established operations in Australia and further expanding its global footprint with data centers worldwide. And despite being a relatively young company at 8 years old, Threatlocker has actually positioned itself as a significant player in the cybersecurity industry and is consistently advancing its own platform with these major updates that they unveiled annually at its flagship conference that we just attended.
Let's talk about some of those announcements that we heard at the conference, because they're quite exciting, actually.
Yeah, so one of the most notable recent advancements is the overhaul of the unified audit system. So it's currently in beta with open client enrollment and dedicated support. And it basically enables advanced search functionality across processes, threat intelligence, and system metadata, which allows queries across virtually any parameter. Performance improvements are substantial, and searches that previously took, say, 5 to 10 minutes now execute in just 2 seconds. So the re-engineered interface was met with a significant applause from the conference audience, as we heard, and reflects both the enhanced speed and the usability of the platform.
Yeah, I think that was something that was really key, is that the people on the floor, the sysadmins, right, and the cybersecurity engineers who are using this product, they all ran straight to this one because they wanted to see, have I been listened to? And that's something that really came out actually, even in the conference, is that they feel they are being listened to. And that as the company grows, that's not changing. But they've got an issue like a search taking 10 minutes and they're getting frustrated, or they've improved that and they'll send you an email. And it's really nice, actually. We bitch so much about companies on here for not listening to customers. So actually, it's really, really good to see that customer feedback's being listened. And then the audience were generally applauding, because not only have they been listened to, their jobs have been made easier, right, overnight. So they
just recorded away about 6 hours of work. Like, yes.
How many times as an engineer have I sat there and been like, I'm just going to read a book. All of my screens are busy doing updates or waiting for something or doing a scan. I'm so bored. And then like your boss will walk in and you're like, oh, damn.
Yeah. That kind of comes back to the eating your own dog food thing, isn't it? It's one thing to be a company that makes reactive security software, but it's another thing to be a company that actually reacts to the people that use your security software.
Yeah, completely. I think it's really important that the software is, even from a human side and usability point of view, that 10 minutes of waiting dropping down to 2 seconds, and just the entire way that search functionality has been completely rewritten. That's just one of many ways to kind of save people time, as well as the security side of things. Like if we go back to this horrid CIA triad concept in cybersecurity, and we talk about availability, well, that 10 minutes time to wait for that availability is now just dropped to 2 seconds. So that is a big parameter of that security triangle that's significantly improving there just with that one change.
So they released their really popular endpoint detection and response system, and you even had when they were talking with the CEO, it was like, I don't want to do it, we're zero trust, so how do we do it differently? And so it underwent rapid improvements to get more into that alignment, which it's achieved. People are very happy with it. And they also then added their master boot record tool a year later. And that's a bit better. And again, it's not running on that typical trusted architecture that you see in normal operating systems like Mac and Windows. It's not just going to go, oh, you're coming from the OS. Okay, fine. I'll let you do anything, right? It doesn't matter who you are or what you are. This incident detection response and this master boot record is going to tell you exactly what's happening in a way that you can read it. And you might get a few surprises, actually. And these tools will actually learn the environment that they operate in. And you've got 24/7 support, right? And they're called cyber heroes, and you can just ring them up and they'll get to you. And that was something that when we spoke to Seamus, actually, we were really, really impressed with, that you can just phone up a pen tester essentially and they're on the phone, and they won't get off the phone until they've fixed your issue. We've been asking for that for a while as well, and that's really good to find out that there are companies who are up for doing that. And the cyber heroes actually reach out, which again, I'm really happy about this. What are they? They called them like the compliance police, I believe, at the event, which was great. Because if you get a call from them, it means that you've messed up. Not
the compliance.
Do you know that you've just left all your RDP ports wide open? Did you know that you're allowing this weird little legacy program over here to do scripting on your core server when it definitely shouldn't be allowed to do that, right? But when you create a tool that's strong, you get a lot of false positives, and that's something that we have to do. So how would they improve that? Well, they've got a new scoring system. We all know that when we get events coming up, they're not individual events. It builds a picture, it builds a story. And we know that. And the engineers, again, feeding back into the company, have explained that you get multiple things, you correlate that data. So they've worked on creating a scoring system which will start correlating that data for you and actually filter out some of those false positives that you're getting through, which is great. You don't just have to action it though, because we all know that you don't want to sometimes because you're busy. So you can reject it or you can push it, and hope that your cyber heroes don't call you 2 weeks later and say, oh, why are those ports still wide open? But it does help. It helps that zero trust. The excuse of, oh, I didn't have time to do it, is not really a thing anymore. You don't have that ability, and if you don't do it, what Threatlocker's app will do is it will send a little audit report off to your boss to let you know that you definitely didn't address that risk when you said you would, and that the engineers maybe need a little bit of a slap or something, or maybe a new employee. So again, that helps with that zero trust. It's not just, oh, we found something. It's about preventing as well as like finding things as well.
Yeah. Then they might be very excited about seeing the tool, but it's solving a problem that needn't be there in the first place. As I said, it's the solution's great, but it's based around a broken model. So, for example, if you're not using overlay networks and things like WireGuard tunnels or systems that abstract your network to a way in which it's already, those problems don't arise, like which physical geographic location is it coming from, you should not need to be checking that, if you understand what I mean. So it's kind of having to deal with lots of legacy problems that are still out there in the way that people configure networks and the way that they plumb together their organizations. So it would be nice to see how it'd be nice to see how Threatlocker evolve as the maturity of zero trust ideas evolve, especially as we're kind of looking at it layer 8 and layer 9, in which the architectural decisions are made, because that's where zero trust really counts.
Yeah,
Yeah, maybe
completely.
they're going to have to increase their cyber hero, staff there to start calling up more companies with those compliance issues, because, as they grow and take on bigger companies, that's going to become almost a never-ending task to some extent.
So I guess a lot of issues for security practitioners is that the security rules can be quite frustrating, especially when they block access, as we were just talking about, to certain things and apps. Users feel that they can't live without. I mean, obviously, it sounds quite ridiculous because we're thinking about, maybe trying to do their online shopping during work hours or something. But sometimes there can be genuine reasons where we need to make some exceptions, and usually a lot of these small things can get caught in these like global catchment, maybe whitelisting. So Helen, as you were talking about, you were trying to use a simple install command.
I was trying to install a package which needed curl to function, and it was nah.
Yeah, so maybe if it's just cloning an app repo or something and it's not going to work, and it's because it's caught under a policy which is just to stop general malicious activity, that's not helpful for anyone. But yeah, we've seen it all before. Users finding workarounds, bringing personal devices to work or exporting data to their phones, sending files via personal emails, and
what was that other one? Like the Chinese, we do transfer for free kind of site. It's so dangerous. You're like,
an absolute nightmare, that, isn't it? Think about that people were just using things like WeTransfer to copy sensitive documents and stuff, and they do on a daily basis. And we're, like you say, we're really familiar with that broken workplace. And what we have here is a broken workplace. Yeah. So, my point is it's great to have tools that can solve that problem, but they're going to do it by blocking stuff and being punitive. So the problem that you need to solve there is to make sure that your workflow and your policies align with what your employees are supposed to be doing, and that you're not getting into these blind alleys based on false negatives and things like that. So we have to be very, very careful of designing tools which actually reinforce bad workplace policies. They stop people thinking in a zero trust way at layers 8 and 9 because they're implementing it at kind of lower layers. Yeah. So this is a very important for us to consider how different tools that purport to implement zero trust fit into a real workplace environment. And that's definitely something we want to do with Threatlocker product. We want to see whether or not it really works. And so, that's I think that's the immense critical feedback that we can give to this company. And it's something that's it's very valuable, I hope to.
Yeah, and let's be honest, saying a hard no often just pushes users towards the riskier behavior, which is not what
they're not doing that, right? I feel like they're
No, they're not. And that's exactly how the Threatlocker user store can actually strike that balance.
Yeah,
and instead of outright...
so let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, because that's an interesting feature of it.
Right.
What you often want within an organization is really your own app store, right? You want a repo in which everything that's in that has been tested and audited, and you're really happy with the way it works, and it's packaged in such a way as to integrate into your organizational structure.
Yeah, and you can just download that, right, straight off.
In fact, you may not even have to just download it. It may be that when you go to use it, when you reach out for that tool, it's automatically going to be installed for you. So when I want to use curl, and I don't actually even want to use curl, because you see, curl just comes up as a dependency of something else that I ran.
Always.
So I've been given permission to run a particular installer for some tool, and when I do it, it reaches out to use curl. In that case, what we want happening behind the scenes in terms of established trust relationships, is that a package exists in the corporate repository that's been audited and looked at. It's been signed off on compliance and everything, and it just gets pulled in and installed. And the user never even sees that security. That's the kind of best security, is a security that the user never sees.
So that's kind of where the Threatlocker user store comes in. it's kind of like an enterprise app store, but for trusted and vetted applications that usually meet both security and the business needs.
Yeah,
So unlike traditional security models that simply like scan for viruses and allow installation, these apps are actually what they call zero trust verified, meaning that they're explicitly tested to make sure they can function securely within the specific system that they're deployed on.
Yeah.
So it's security without compromise, basically giving the users the tools they need whilst keeping the network locked down.
Well, it's as good as your curation filters. It's as good as your ingestion side and your monitoring side. You know, when we talked with the bot slayer about the problem of positive security being its unboundedness, that's a very difficult problem to solve. And it means that for a company like Threatlocker, unless they partner with and expand in terms of where they ingest trust from, right? Whether that's a sort of a Debian repository or a curated list of Apple applications or whatever hardware you're trying to run that thing on, is it has to be outsourced because otherwise you'll never be able to cope with the scale.
Right.
And at that point, you know, zero trust becomes 0 point something trust because you have moved that boundary out. What you want to do is you want to enable the organization or the individual user to have as much absolute say-so over that, yeah, and to also incorporate multiple trust models. It's really, really important that you never go to just one person and say all the time, oh, can I trust that? Can I trust that? Because that person becomes the sole arbiter of trust, you see, and that's actually a very negative security situation in terms of trust relations. You want to, you need to spread your trust.
You know what, that's what the App Store does do. So it's not just their App Store as well. You can change it and you can edit it and you can actually do that dynamically by who's accessing it, because we all know that IT need access to a lot more than reception, for example. So that it is a step in the right direction in terms of apps, and it's certainly better than the App Stores that we've got from the major players, which will do a virus scan. And that's it, really.
Absolutely. I think many of those commercial app stores are fraudulent, really. They're negligent in terms of the accountability that they pretend or say that they exercise over their repositories. And we know lots of malware comes in through big tech app stores. Yeah.
So they also gave, I know it's going to be not something that Andy's going to be too happy in, but there is a mobile phone app and there is cloud security. Not something that we like in security, you know, so mobile phone use and cloud, but hey, that's how companies behave. And they do it a lot of the time with Microsoft 365. And that's actually a challenge, really, because it's what, 90% market share. Everyone's uploaded all their documents onto SharePoint, essentially. And when you've got a monoculture like that, it is going to be targeted. So how have Threatlocker tried to deal with some of that without, you know, taking down the giants? Well, they've combined a mobile app with IP restrictions on it that actually map the employee's typical movements. So again, I know that Andy's probably going to be a little bit scared of this because it is quite frightening, but yeah, you are essentially going to be tracked when you leave your home in the morning and you travel to your workplace. It's going to know, especially if you're answering emails, you know, that you're actually you, because it knows where your house is and it knows that you're going to go get your coffee in the morning. It knows that you're going to do this. It kind of feels like it's also a way for your boss to see whether you were in the park earlier or in the pub. So there is like, yeah, it's good. And it helps deal with the Microsoft 365, but is it going to be abused by other companies to some extent? You know, it is needed though, you know, with remote staff and people working all over the place. Like I said, I do a remote job and I swear to God, some of them, you can hear birds in the background and you're like, oh, where are you this week?
Well, I mean, because you mentioned me twice in that. So about is that something that sounds like something that Andy would be scared of. I'm certainly not scared of things like that, but I greatly disapprove of them. And I very strongly disapprove of any technologies which are used for totalitarian, privacy invading, abusive uses. And I don't think it's ever clear at all when it's acceptable to use things like that. So, you know, I disapprove of all of those products and those methods wholeheartedly. However, you know, So Threatlocker are a company and that are implementing their understanding of zero trust in a way that solves real world problems. Mm-hmm. And as I've said, these problems exist because of broken security models in the first place, right. Bad approaches to security. And I'm much more interested personally in ways that zero trust has a positive and enhancing way of actually, we never bump into those because we don't think that way anymore. Yeah, we stop thinking about where someone's location is because, frankly, it doesn't bloody matter and it's none of your business. It's not relevant to the security paradigm that you're working with. Yeah, and I think it's possible to, when I think about how people are going to relate to zero trust, if the bad side of it is presented, that the short-term thinking, the quick fix, dealing with already existing problems and potentially making them worse, people are going to take a negative view of zero trust, and they're going to see it as a kind of fascist, controlling, abusive paradigm. And I'm not sure whether at essence it is. I think that's something that we philosophically need to engage with and investigate more. I'm optimistic that it can be a way of being complete opposite, and that using the right trust paradigms, because remember, it's never zero trust. It's being mindful about trust. Yeah. And if you're mindful about trust in the proper way and your tools, because you need enabling by tools. And if Threatlocker are able to supply those kinds of tools, which are enabling to trust mindfulness, it works against abuse and techno-fascist kind of philosophies.
Yeah, it does. It seems like they've had to apply this sort of, the plaster to a situation that we've talked about quite a lot. That's the cloud access. Anyone can access your cloud from anywhere in the world, essentially, in most of those cases, because they get paid for inputs and outputs. If your client's doing it, great. But also if five hackers have got in and they're great, I'm still getting paid. I'm getting paid 6 times over. And that, again, it comes from those programs being rushed out without security being in place. And now other companies are having to come along and fix something that shouldn't be broken and implement something that they probably aren't, can be abused, potentially abused.
What I'd say is that like a good trust intervention, a good trust arbiter, a tool that was able to kind of come in and help you with trust, would be the one that stopped you from using a cloud technology in the first place, in that case where you didn't need to. Thus obviating the entire problem of the fact that the cloud is basically your data on someone else's computer, and you have zero trust. Let's use that in the right way. You have zero trustworthiness of a provider who you only have a business relationship with. Your trust extends as far as a financial relationship.
Yeah, and I think that would kind of be a good time to talk about Threatlocker Insights. Threatlocker Insights has been roughly 5 years in the making, and this is something that we're talking a lot about. The result is basically a powerhouse of real-time threat intelligence, and I think they said it logs roughly 4 billion rows of data every hour, and it rapidly compiles and analyzes all this information to detect emerging threats with unmatched speed and precision, in terms of anything else that we've heard of already. And I guess by intelligently filtering out that unnecessarily useful data or unuseful data, Insights itself actually focuses on those key security indicators, such as like program dependencies that we were just talking about, execution environments, and behavioral abnormalities, which actually allows for those faster hash and domain comparisons than we've ever seen before. And in just a year, I think performance has dramatically improved, making it actually possible to analyze threats in a fraction of the time than previously required. And all of this behavior is centrally collected. So this is where the engineers can assess expected program behavior, maybe make it easier to detect, report, and share that intelligence on malicious activity. And the system continuously evaluates the domains, usage trends, full process trees even, file hashes and any risky applications with maybe a dynamic risk scoring system that they use. So this is kind of zero trust in action. It's that live, adaptive, driven by real world customer data that is constantly monitored and refined. And it's not just the threat detection, it's that trusted community security that's working in real time to actually stay ahead of those attackers.
I think this is brilliant, and we love this kind of stuff. This is a very positive, the Insights program, because we know that open source intelligence sharing, threat research, threat modeling, all of these kind of things that can be disseminated across the security community quickly, is that, that's how things work now, and we have to have tools which quickly allow us to ingest it and interpret it and integrate it through the policies that we want into our own security structures, and anything that does that is great. We love that.
Yeah, open source threat modeling, right? That's what we're talking about. It does happen, but it happens behind closed doors with big companies only, and it will be just their company that they're really looking into. So it's really good for smaller and medium enterprises as well to actually get some of that information, because they're just going to be next, and they're probably third parties of those big companies anyway, and that's how they'll get to them. So having centralized data,
they all have that data and that they can share it. Even these small businesses that wouldn't usually have access to this much data, but using the Threatlocker software and services, they can just tap into that and use that in their own environments in the way that they want to, which is just the amount of data that usually nobody in that, not small, medium businesses, would ever have access to.
So another new feature was stronger web control, and the DNS method just isn't working the way it should because of third-party domains, right, which are blocked or bypassed. So you'll want to sign up and get an app somewhere, but it's using another dependency somewhere else, and you've been blocked. That's not allowed, right? And you see this quite a lot, especially with new software or things that are like not as used as often in the office as much. So we find that quite a lot in security and IT work. So they've created a user-friendly system that just moves away from a DNS filtering into more of a policy-driven dashboard, which is tailored by your staff. So instead of just saying, right, you're doing this, it's completely blocked, or everyone is not allowed to use it, where you can say, well, actually everyone except maybe the chief executive, he really likes it, he can use it, but everyone else is blocked. So it just gives you the way to segregate that web control and to make sure that everybody knows what they're doing, and it can't be bypassed or cancelled. So you tell me that so many times you accidentally set something wrong on your browser settings or maybe in your Intune, and actually it can just be bypassed anyway, and those clever people like us would have been doing that for years. I don't think any business has ever managed to actually stop me doing things that I shouldn't be doing on the internet, which is like watching YouTube on my break. So it would be good to see if this can do that. Is it going to work? I think it probably does, and I think that some guys can probably be a little bit mean. They might decide to turn on social media only for 1 hour a day, as Danny pointed out, and then change the hour.
It's interesting that the thinking again about like the security models, whether your trust model is one that has an understanding of the level of trust that you have in another entity and how much flexibility you're able to give them, versus a fine-grained model which looks like coercive control. So, for example, presumably you want to watch YouTube videos in your lunch break?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, on the Wi-Fi, because I don't want to spend my data points. And
it's your lunch break. Yeah,
I want to use their Wi-Fi because I don't want to pay for it. That's.
I see where you're highlighting a digital harm, a perceived harm. Yeah. So if that you have to be careful of tools which allow people to make kind of emotionally based punitive decisions that are not really backed up by any sensible policy. Often when you name things and you bring them out into the negotiation, and trust is all about negotiation, right? Trust is all about it's a complex dance in which people observe each other's behaviours and adapt their posture to them, reactively. And I'm really pleased that Threatlocker, in their modelling of software systems, gets that's really important. But what happens when you start off with a priori wrong assumptions that don't make their way into the negotiation? That's where lots of things go wrong. So if your boss actually had the guts to come up to you and say, I don't mind you watching the YouTube in your lunch break, Helen, but I'm going to have to charge you 0.71 pence, which will be docked from your wages, and then you could say, okay, fair enough, you're that kind of person who doesn't want me to spend 0.71 pence on watching YouTube videos in my lunch break. Great, now I can renegotiate my trust relationship with you.
I usually watch TV during my lunch break. It's cool. Yeah, totally.
So
On a pay rise to cover the Wi-Fi cost.
yeah, exactly. It's in trust tools are very good in that they expose trust relations in order for them to be negotiated. Yeah.
We also spoke to Spectre X, who were there, and they were fantastic because they were really, really good at giving us a tech breakdown and understanding of zero trust. So let's clue you over to them now and have a listen.
We're here with Spectre X. Can you tell us all about your company and what you do?
Thank you so much for having us here. So Spectre X is brings zero trust to the data layer. We allow organizations to share their sensitive data anywhere in the world, but retain that control. Typically, when we think cybersecurity, we think about protecting within that house, creating that castle, not letting anything in. But in today's world, we're working in a way where modern workflows have to take us past the perimeter.
Absolutely.
Sensitive data needs to leave, and SpectreX allows that security and protection to travel with the data.
But we know that perimeter security doesn't really work anymore, and we're seeing that more with AI coming in, that those perimeters are quite easy to take down with emails and things, where they've used the AI and suddenly the phishing is so good, it's tricking people. You can present yourself in a meeting as somebody else. So we're seeing that. It's not going to be something that we can do. So having that solution is just so important.
It is. So, and that perimeter will always be important. But the idea that, a business exists by that ability to collaborate and have those partnerships external, even when it comes to, the business relationships, but also our customers.
Right.
As businesses, we have a responsibility to, safeguard the data that we're bringing in and the data that we're moving around those partnerships. And that can't be done by putting it behind a wall. And we really have to find modern solutions that can do that and move with the times. And SpectreX has done that in a really efficient, dynamic way that isn't seen anywhere in the space.
Yeah, that's right.
Of course. So, in terms of zero trust, what does that mean to you and SpectreX?
For us, trust is never stagnant. Trust has to be something that changes based on the relationship, the circumstance, and we have to be able to remove that trust when the situation presents itself. And we really look at that in data. Say, for example, an NDA, right? What does every NDA say at the end of the arrangement? You have to delete that data because that relationship is no longer under that agreement of trust. And so we work in a space where that data can be widely distributed during those times, but once that NDA closes, once that trust is gone, we pull back that data access.
It's actually quite a lot like the GDPR compliance, and we have that. We now have the processor and the controller.
Yeah.
Because before it was just you're all the same, but you're not. If you own the data and you've asked for the data, you have a different set of requirements and a different set of regulations because you are responsible. And if you're processing that, you have to answer to the people who collected it. And it's actually we're really getting on top of those regulations and those rules, and we're able to really include zero trust, I guess, in what we do, and that's becoming the new way rather than perimeter security.
And we're seeing that in a lot of regulated spaces. I think we saw that in, say, for example, last year in FTC with the auto industry of saying, you guys are holding so much sensitive things, you don't get to sit outside of this unregulated space anymore. And we're seeing that moving through industry to industry just because of that responsibility that the business holds to use that data responsibly and also expend and invest in protections, not as protecting their own well-being, but also that of the customers and the relationships that they're working with.
In terms of the wider kind of cybersecurity landscape, What would be your top tips for maybe just a normal citizen or someone who's even in IT and just wants to know a bit more about how to keep themselves safe in the big cybersecurity world we're in?
Absolutely. Well, I think it comes down to the fact that, for a lot of people, this is a very complicated territory, right? Where these are big ideas where they think, oh, this is not something that I can even begin educating myself on because it's so far out of reach for me. And, I came into the cybersecurity space knowing nothing and learned through asking questions, and I think there's a lot of great spaces to begin. And I think frameworks give us a really practical way to go about that. I think the CIS controls are really approachable ways for businesses of any size to understand what are the basic things that I can begin with and how can I make a change that isn't one or nothing, right? It's not that. There are small incremental steps that we can do that say, do we know what our assets are? Do we know where our weak points are? And how can we begin to make incremental changes that bring us from better to best?
Right. And I guess that's something that we've seen as a theme throughout the Zero Trust. We're like, oh, it's Zero Trust. If we don't know you, we don't want you in. But actually, there is a positive trust, and there is a community. So if we don't like you, we don't know you, you're a random IP, we don't want to talk to you. But the community is so strong that we will share that information across borders, across groups, because none of us want to be an individual, we're building a huge worldwide community in the West here that can really share that information in a fast time.
Yeah, and that's part of how our product works is first bringing identity into that data access, right? The first thing that we do is say, can we identify who that receiver is? And can we do that with any person, right? We don't have to bring them in to identify. Can we bring that identity and authentication and verification to the user?
Right.
And then match their controls and parameters for using that data based on that identity.
So if our viewers wanted to find out a bit more about SpectreX, where can they get in touch to speak to you and what kind of products do you offer?
Yeah, through our website, spectrex.com, and on LinkedIn. My space is speaking to people that don't know about this, right? Introducing to the topic, and I'm available on LinkedIn, and so is our whole team. Reach out, right? There's data governance, this massive area, right? There's so many different moving parts to it, and I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm not ready to approach that. It's, do I have to implement classification? Do I have to, spend my millions to do it? No, you don't. You just have to start with asking questions on where to begin. And SpectreX gets that in a really approachable way, right? How can we create security that is an added layer to your existing workflows rather than replacing everything that you do? And that's really how we start. Let's assess your biggest risk. Where is that data leaving? Where is your largest exposure? We begin there. We don't have to address it all at one point. We just want to bring you from a little bit better than you were.
And it's not that hard. I think that's something that we like to break down with our shows. Everyone was like, oh, hacking cybersecurity is really difficult. But actually, we all use computers now. It's not 1994 anymore. So we all have those devices in our pockets. We do know what we're doing, and we are able to keep ourselves safe. And we have to learn that in our teenage years now. And it's working.
Yeah, and I think there's the arc of we have grown up in that technology space, and we have a sort of an older generation that hasn't, but has also learned and adapted because there are vendors and there are MSPs that are willing to take them on that educational journey. And it just starts with asking the questions, reading a little bit, and understanding where you are today, right? Yeah.
And one last question: what comic book character are you going as tonight?
I'm going to go as the female Thor.
Yes.
I think the men have too many fun characters, and
there are too many men characters in comic books. Full stop. To be honest,
I want to wear the hammer.
Right?
I've got the hair for it, so we're just going to lean in.
Yeah, that's good. I'm debating mermaid or not, but there's no comic book mermaid, so I'm screwed.
Make your own.
That's true.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys. It's
It's
really
been
a
great
pleasure.
talking to you.
Thank
And
you.
we can't wait to see what you offer.
Exactly. Thank you so much for having us on. I think you're doing great things for the community, and really a pleasure to join in and speak a bit about this conversation today.
Thank you. Cheers.
That's another interesting one where that's a problem that should not exist at all. I mean, the fact that it's taken that after 40 or 50 years, people still struggle to copy a file from one computer to another is an absolute disgrace. And there are so many solutions which just cut through that from decades and decades ago. Where like things like wormhole type problems. That basically you have got to the point where you've established the identity and trustworthiness of another entity to send you a file to a specific location within your file system. You should not be using any third-party services after that point. You should be figuring out how your overlay network or your WireGuard infrastructure, whatever, simply opens up a file handle between those locations. It should never be stored on any third-party server at all. And so that's, again, potentially a problem, a solution to a problem that should never exist. Right?
But it's again, these problems do exist, and we do need companies to come in and to do that for us, because the way that we're doing it at the moment is just chaotic, and it's causing loss of income on a mass scale. So it is really, really handy to have companies who are going to try and solve that problem.
Yeah, it's first aid. It's triage and first aid. It kind of, a lot of the time, the image that sticks in my head for cybersecurity is the Normandy beach landing from Saving Private Ryan. And the job of the medics there.
When we think about third-party supplier for a business, it's usually a negative thing, because they're taking the control or an element of control away from the data owner. And something that SpectreX don't do is that. So they work with organizations to maximize the organization's control over their own data in a secure and also compliant way. So when we think about GDPR and the stuff that we've spoken about before on the show, SpectreX actually help organizations out with how to manage its data according to that organization's own rules, but also make sure that they're also compliant with regulatory stuff. So, for example, in the EU. And something that they always talk about is the fact that organizations are always empowered to pull the plug whenever they want, which is a good way of keeping the data in the data owner's control.
That's a really really interesting set of claims. I looked at SpectreX, and the interpretation that came to my mind was a very old-fashioned word, which is a data bank. Right. Think about how your relationship is with a bank. They manage your money. A data bank, as a principle, as an entity, manages your data for you, right? And it's very interesting the extent to which I immediately jumped to the assumption that would be a cloud-based solution, where essentially you give all your data to them and they manage it remotely. Whereas obviously the better data policy would be, if you're going to make an assertion like that the user has complete control over their data. I think their tagline was something like "your data, your choice," or something like that. Well, obviously that would be better if it was all on-prem, if it was all stored in not only a logically but physically very closely supervised way. And so it struck me as very difficult to make a product which spans cloud and on-prem. But it'd be very interesting to talk to them more at some point and see how they've solved that split. Yeah. You understand? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hopefully we will. Let's get SpectreX on the next show.
That would be great. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this first part of this 3-part series on Zero Trust. We've got lots more exciting footage to bring you in the second and third episodes, including vendor interviews, loads of cool footage of Zero Trust World, discussions on cybersecurity best practices, and lots more to come. Stay tuned. See you in the next one.